Life in ancient Greece was at once practical and poetic, grounded in survival, yet always colored with imagination and ritual. From sunlit mornings when citizens poured into bustling squares, to twilight hours when families gathered around small fires, every moment was stitched into the fabric of community, tradition, and a reverence for both human effort and divine influence. This script is meant to guide you gently through the many aspects of ancient Greek life, not as a dry list of facts, but as a calming exploration, an invitation to imagine what it would feel like to live among them, to hear their voices, to smell their food, and to walk their stone-paved streets. We'll begin with one of the most vivid aspects of their daily existence, the home, where family life unfolded behind stuccoed walls and shaded courtyards. Section 1. The Ancient Greek Home and Family. In ancient Greece, the home, known as the oikos, was not merely a shelter, but the very foundation of society. To step into a Greek house was to enter a space where every detail reflected the values, priorities, and rhythms of the culture. Imagine small, whitewashed walls of mud brick or stone, clustered along narrow, winding streets. These houses were modest from the outside, often with little to indicate the life within. Yet once you crossed the threshold, you would find a carefully arranged world that balanced privacy, functionality, and family harmony. Most Greek homes were centered around an open-air courtyard, often the brightest and most important part of the house. Here, the family would gather to cook, to work, or to simply enjoy the warmth of the sun. A small altar might be placed in the courtyard as well, dedicated to Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, ensuring divine protection over the household. The layout beyond the courtyard was simple yet purposeful. Storage rooms for oil jars and grain, small bedrooms with minimal furnishings, and workspaces where women wove cloth or prepared food. What's striking is how much the Greek home reflected the roles and responsibilities of its inhabitants. Men spent much of their day outside, attending the assembly, discussing politics, or conducting trade in the agora, so the oikos was largely the domain of women. Within these walls, wives oversaw the running of the household, managed servants if the family could afford them, and ensured that food, clothing, and daily necessities were maintained. Spinning wool and weaving cloth were especially important tasks, and looms often stood in prominent places, serving as symbols of a wife's industriousness and devotion. Children played a central role in the home, too, though their lives quickly diverged depending on gender. Boys were prepared for citizenship and public life, beginning with lessons in reading, writing, music, and physical training. Their education was considered essential, for they would one day serve as soldiers, voters, or leaders. Girls, on the other hand, were taught the skills of domestic life, learning from their mothers how to manage the home, cook, and weave. Though their world was more confined, it was no less vital to the continuation of Greek society. One of the most interesting features of Greek family life was the way marriages were arranged. Weddings were less about romance and more about alliance, with fathers arranging unions to strengthen family ties and secure property. The wedding ceremony itself was filled with ritual, processions, sacrifices to the gods, and feasts that brought together both families. Once married, a woman's role was to manage the household and bear children, ideally sons who could carry on the family line. Despite the strong division of roles, family life in ancient Greece was not devoid of warmth. festivals and religious celebrations brought households together, with feasting, music, and laughter spilling out into courtyards. Children played with dolls made of clay or knuckle bones used as dice, while elders told stories of heroes and gods. Meals, though simple, were moments of shared joy: bread, olives, figs, and wine forming the staples of everyday dining, occasionally enriched with fish or cheese. The home was also a place where spirituality intertwined with the ordinary. Daily life was guided by small rituals: offerings of grain at the hearth, prayers whispered before meals, or libations poured to honor the gods. These practices remind us that the Greeks saw the divine not as distant, but as present in the very act of living. To imagine yourself in an ancient Greek household is to imagine the comforting rhythm of daily chores, the hum of conversation, and the ever-present balance between duty and devotion. Life here was neither glamorous nor easy, yet it was deeply human, a tapestry woven from the threads of necessity, tradition, and quiet joy. Section 2. Food and dining in ancient Greece. If the home was the heart of ancient Greek family life, then food was the quiet rhythm that pulsed through each day. Meals in ancient Greece were not lavish by modern standards, nor were they intended to be. Instead, they were shaped by simplicity, balance, and a profound connection to the land. Every bite carried the story of the soil, the sea, and the seasons, and every meal was an opportunity to express gratitude, not just to one another, but to the gods themselves. Imagine waking in the soft light of dawn, the air still cool and filled with the faint scent of olive trees. The first meal of the day was modest, often just bread dipped in wine, accompanied perhaps by figs or olives. This early sustenance, known as akritisma, was not meant to indulge, but to prepare. Bread was central to nearly every meal, baked from barley or wheat, and could be eaten plain, flavored with herbs, or softened in liquid. For many, it was the daily anchor of nourishment. The midday meal, lighter still, might consist of cheese, fruits, and a few vegetables. But it was the evening meal, the deipnon, that truly brought families and friends together. As the day's work ended, people gathered around low tables, reclining on couches if they were wealthy, or sitting on simple stools if they were not. The atmosphere was one of companionship and reflection. Even when the fare was simple, the act of eating together carried a richness that transcended the food itself. Greek cuisine reflected both abundance and restraint. On the one hand, their land and seas provided a variety of ingredients: grapes, olives, figs, chickpeas, lentils, herbs like thyme and oregano, honey, fish from the nearby waters, and on occasion, goat or lamb. On the other hand, meat was rare on the daily table, reserved mainly for festivals or sacrifices. This restraint gave rise to a diet that was both practical and deeply nourishing, centered on what we now call the Mediterranean model: vegetables, grains, legumes, olive oil, and wine. One of the most iconic staples of Greek life was olive oil. It was more than food. It was medicine, fuel for lamps, a base for perfumes, and a substance used in rituals. To the Greeks, the olive tree was sacred, a gift from the goddess Athena herself. In fact, the city of Athens was said to have chosen Athena as its patron because she offered them the olive, symbolizing wisdom and sustenance. To pour golden oil over bread, vegetables, or fish was to partake in something divine, something that connected the body and the spirit. Wine, too, was ever present. Yet the Greeks approached it with a ritualistic respect. Wine was never drunk undiluted. Instead, it was mixed with water, a reminder that moderation was key. Too much, and one risked disgrace or folly. Properly balanced, however, wine became the centerpiece of the symposium, or drinking gathering, where men reclined together, conversed, debated philosophy, told stories, and enjoyed music. The symposium was more than a party. It was an institution, a space where ideas flowed as freely as the diluted wine, where the boundary between daily life and deeper reflection blurred into harmony. For those less privileged, meals were humbler but no less meaningful. A poor farmer might eat barley bread, onions, and a few olives each day, washing it down with water or watered wine. Fish, plentiful in the Aegean, was a common protein, but meat remained rare for most. Festivals, however, offered moments of abundance. During religious celebrations, animals were sacrificed to the gods, and the meat was shared among the community. These occasions not only nourished the body, but also bound people together in shared faith and gratitude. The act of eating was never purely physical in ancient Greece. It was spiritual, social, and even philosophical. The great thinkers of the time often reflected on diet, health, and balance. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, emphasized food as a form of medicine, urging moderation and variety. Philosophers like Pythagoras promoted vegetarianism, believing that abstaining from meat brought purity to both body and soul. In their writings, we see the understanding that what one eats shapes not only health, but character and clarity of mind. Meals also mirrored the seasons. In spring and summer, fresh fruits and vegetables graced the table: grapes, cucumbers, and leafy greens. Autumn brought nuts, figs, and the grape harvest, when wine was pressed and stored for the year ahead. Winter was leaner, with dried fruits, legumes, and preserved goods sustaining households through colder months. This seasonal rhythm tied the Greeks closely to nature, reminding them that human life, too, followed cycles of abundance and scarcity. Dining was also shaped by social hierarchy. In wealthier homes, slaves often prepared meals and served them, freeing citizens to focus on conversation and leisure. In poorer households, the family cooked together, using simple tools and hearth fires. What united all classes, however, was the communal nature of the meal. Food was to be shared, not hoarded. Even the poorest might offer a portion of bread or wine to a guest. For hospitality, Xenia was considered sacred, protected by Zeus himself. Perhaps most enchanting is the way the Greeks wove myth and ritual into the act of eating. Before each meal, small offerings might be made: crumbs of bread, a splash of wine poured onto the ground. To honor the gods and the spirits of the household, to eat without gratitude was unthinkable. For every harvest, every fish caught, every jar of oil pressed was seen as a gift not merely of human labor, but of divine generosity. When we imagine the dining table of ancient Greece, we should not picture a feast of endless delicacies, but rather a modest spread of bread, olives, figs, and cheese, perhaps a dish of fish drizzled with honey or oil. Yet within that simplicity lies the richness of connection to the land, to the community, and to the gods. In those shared meals, under the fading glow of the Mediterranean sun, one could feel both the grounding weight of daily life and the lightness of joy that comes from eating together. Section 3. Work and occupations in ancient Greece. Life in ancient Greece was not only defined by philosophy, art, or mythology, it was also shaped by the rhythm of work. Every person, whether free citizen, enslaved individual, farmer, craftsman, or merchant, had a role in maintaining the delicate balance of society. While we often imagine the Greeks reclining in symposia or debating in the agora, the truth is that daily life required steady effort, skill, and cooperation. At the foundation of Greek society stood the farmers. Agriculture was the backbone of the economy, and the land itself dictated much of what could be grown. The terrain was rocky and mountainous, which made vast fields of grain difficult, but olive trees and grapevines thrived. Farmers rose with the sun, tending to groves of olives that would yield oil, one of Greece's most precious commodities, or vineyards that would produce wine for both local use and trade. Grain was grown where possible, especially barley, which formed the base for bread and porridge. Sheep and goats, well suited to the rugged terrain, provided wool, milk, and meat. Farmers' work was relentless, guided by the seasons. In spring, they plowed and planted. In summer, they tended crops and prayed for rain. In autumn, they harvested grapes and olives. And in winter, they stored food, repaired tools, and prepared for the cycle to begin anew. Life was not easy. But farming families lived close to the rhythms of nature, their labor rewarded by the satisfaction of feeding both themselves and their communities. Beyond the fields, the towns and cities bustled with the activity of artisans and craftsmen. Skilled workers were essential to Greek life, producing pottery, metal goods, textiles, and tools. Potters shaped clay into vessels for storing oil and wine, their creations both practical and artistic, decorated with images of gods, heroes, and daily life. Blacksmiths and bronze workers forged weapons, armor, and household items, their fires glowing deep into the night. Weavers, often women, created textiles for clothing, blankets, and trade, turning raw wool into finely woven garments that displayed both utility and beauty. Among the most respected of artisans were the builders and stonemasons. Their skill raised temples, theaters, and homes that still stand today as echoes of their genius. Carved marble columns, detailed friezes, and sturdy city walls were not simply feats of engineering. They were testaments to the dedication of countless workers whose names we will never know. To walk through the ruins of the Parthenon, for example, is to feel the touch of thousands of hands who labored with precision and care centuries ago. In addition to crafts, trade formed a crucial part of the Greek economy. Greece's geography, with its scattered islands and long coastline, encouraged maritime activity. Merchants sailed across the Aegean and beyond, carrying olive oil, wine, and pottery to other lands, and returning with grain, spices, metals, and exotic goods. Ports buzzed with energy as ships were loaded and unloaded, and markets rang with the voices of traders striking bargains. For many Greeks, the sea was both opportunity and risk, a pathway to wealth and connection, but also a place of storms and uncertainty. The agora, or marketplace, was the heart of urban life. Here, farmers sold their produce, merchants displayed wares from distant lands, and citizens gathered not only to buy and sell, but also to meet, talk, and share news. To walk through the agora was to experience the pulse of the city, a blend of commerce, politics, and community. The agora was where everyday life unfolded in its most vibrant form, reminding us that work was never just labor, but also interaction and exchange. Not all work was voluntary. Enslaved labor was an undeniable part of the Greek world. Enslaved people worked in households, mines, fields, and workshops, performing tasks that ranged from cooking and cleaning to back-breaking mining deep underground. In silver mines, especially those of Lorient, enslaved workers endured brutal conditions to extract the ore that funded Athens' rise as a naval power. Others served in homes as tutors or attendants, living lives more entwined with their masters. Though their contributions were vast, their lives often went unrecorded, shadows supporting the brighter stories of free citizens. Women's work, though less publicly acknowledged, was equally essential. In most households, women managed domestic duties, cooking, weaving, raising children, and overseeing slaves if the family owned them. Weaving, in particular, held deep significance, not just as a practical skill, but as a symbol of order and care. The rhythmic work of the loom was both a necessity and an art, producing fabrics for daily use and garments for special occasions. In rural areas, women also helped in the fields, proving that the division between domestic and agricultural labor was not always rigid. For those with specialized skills, there were also professions that blurred the line between work and service. Doctors, influenced by Hippocrates' teachings, cared for the sick with a blend of herbal remedies, diet, and observation. Teachers and tutors instructed boys in reading, writing, mathematics, and rhetoric, shaping the minds that would one day lead the city-state. Musicians, actors, and poets offered performances that were not only entertainment, but also cultural enrichment, weaving stories and songs that carried moral lessons and civic pride. What is striking about work in ancient Greece is how deeply it was tied to identity and status. Citizens were expected to contribute to their polis through farming, military service, or public office. Artisans and merchants occupied a middle ground, valued for their skills, but sometimes viewed with suspicion if wealth overshadowed tradition. Enslaved individuals, though vital, were denied recognition or rights. Through it all, work reflected not only survival, but also the values of discipline, community, and balance. Even leisure was connected to work. The festivals that punctuated the year were not merely days of rest, but celebrations of labor's fruits, the harvest, the sacrifices, the crafts perfected, and the ships returned from trade. Every song, dance, and ritual was tied to the recognition that life was a collaboration between human effort and divine blessing. To imagine an ordinary day in ancient Greece is to see hands at work everywhere. Farmers in the fields, artisans at their forges, women at their looms, sailors on the sea, merchants in the marketplace, children carrying water, and philosophers observing it all, weaving labor itself into the larger questions of what it means to live a good life. Work was never just toil. It was identity, community, and the rhythm of survival and creativity combined. Section 4. Religion and festivals in ancient Greece. If daily work formed the structure of ancient Greek life, then religion was the spirit that filled it. To the Greeks, the gods were not distant or abstract figures. They were woven into the very fabric of existence, present in the cycles of nature, the fate of cities, and even the smallest details of daily tasks. Every journey, harvest, battle, or celebration was touched by divine presence. Religion was less about doctrine and more about practice, rituals, offerings, and festivals that ensured harmony between mortals and the powerful beings who shaped their world. At the center of Greek religion stood the Olympian gods, each with their domain and personality. Zeus ruled the skies and thunder. Hera watched over marriage. Athena guided wisdom and strategy. Apollo represented the arts and feeling. Artemis guarded the wilderness. Poseidon commanded the seas. Yet while the Olympians dominated myth, countless lesser gods, nymphs, spirits, and local deities played equally important roles. A spring might be sacred to a nymph, a grove to Pan, or a household fire to Hestia. In this way, religion was immediate and personal. Wherever Greeks walked, they felt the divine close at hand. Temples were the physical expressions of this reverence, rising in marble and stone. They were not simply places for gatherings, but homes for the gods themselves. Inside, a statue of the deity stood at the heart of worship, often richly adorned with gold or ivory. Yet ordinary Greeks did not enter to pray directly to the god. Instead, they brought offerings to the altar outside, burnt sacrifices of animals, libations of wine, or simple tokens like cakes or fruit. Smoke rising into the sky symbolized the bond between human and divine. The ritual was as important as the gift itself, for it demonstrated respect and ensured balance. Religion also shaped time. The Greek calendar was punctuated by festivals, each dedicated to a god and tied to agricultural cycles, civic pride, or cultural tradition. These festivals were moments when work paused and communities came together in celebration. They combined solemn ritual with joyous activity, sacrifices in the morning, feasts and games in the afternoon, and performances or dances that stretched long into the night. For many, festivals were the highlights of the year, binding citizens in shared devotion and joy. One of the most famous was the Panathenaea, held in Athens in honor of Athena, the city's patron goddess. Every 4 years, the Great Panathenaea featured grand processions where citizens marched to the Acropolis, carrying a newly woven robe for Athena's statue. Athletes competed in races. Wrestlers tested their strength. Musicians filled the air with song, and poets recited verses. Victors won not money, but amphorae filled with precious olive oil, a sacred gift from Athena herself. The festival was both religious and civic pride embodied. Athenians honoring their goddess while displaying their unity and culture. Elsewhere, festivals could be equally vibrant. The Dionysia, dedicated to Dionysus, god of wine and theater, was a celebration of performance and creativity. Tragedies and comedies were staged before large audiences, their themes exploring human nature, fate, and the gods' influence. These performances were not mere entertainment. They were offerings to the god, a way of honoring him through art. Imagine the crowds gathering in the great stone theaters, the hush as a play began, and the swell of voices that carried lessons of morality, sorrow, and laughter to thousands at once. The Olympic Games, though remembered today for sport, were originally a religious festival honoring Zeus. Held in Olympia every 4 years, they drew athletes from across the Greek world. Competitors swore oaths before the gods to uphold fair play. Victors crowned with olive wreaths were seen not just as athletes, but as individuals blessed by divine favor. The games were sacred time, when even wars paused so that athletes and spectators could travel safely. Through the Olympics, we glimpse how religion could unite Greeks beyond the boundaries of city-states. Festivals were not limited to the great public events. Many were local, tied to specific gods or agricultural cycles. Villages might honor Demeter with rituals for fertility and harvest, or Apollo with songs and dances in spring. Even within households, small rituals marked daily life. Families poured libations to the household gods, offered food at shrines, and invoked blessings before meals. To the Greeks, piety was not occasional but constant, woven into the rhythm of waking, working, eating, and resting. Priests and priestesses guided these practices, though their roles differed from what we might imagine today. They were not moral authorities, but caretakers of rituals, ensuring that sacrifices and ceremonies were performed correctly. Often chosen from prominent families, their service could be temporary, lasting only for the duration of a festival or ritual. Unlike in some later religions, there was no centralized priesthood. Instead, each city and sanctuary maintained its own traditions, reflecting the diversity of Greek belief. Mystery cults offered another dimension of spirituality. These were private religious groups, often promising deeper connection to the divine, or even hints of life after death. The Eleusinian Mysteries, dedicated to Demeter and Persephone, were among the most famous. Participants underwent secret rites that bound them together and offered the hope of a more blessed afterlife. Though the details remain hidden, whispered across time, the mysteries reveal that even in a religion focused on ritual and this worldly harmony, Greeks still yearned for answers to life's greatest questions. What made Greek religion so remarkable was its flexibility. Myths explained the gods' nature, but interpretation was fluid. Stories could differ from city to city, and practices varied depending on region. A god honored in one place might be overlooked in another, yet the shared framework of belief held the Greek world together. Religion was less about strict rules and more about maintaining relationships with gods, with community, and with nature itself. To imagine a festival day in ancient Greece is to picture bright processions winding through city streets, the smell of roasting meat rising from altars, music and laughter echoing in open squares, and solemn prayers whispered beneath marble columns. It is to feel a society alive with reverence, joy, and connection, where honoring the gods was inseparable from celebrating life itself. Section 5. Family Life in Ancient Greece. While the grand temples, bustling markets, and dramatic theaters of ancient Greece often capture our imagination, the heart of Greek society beat quietly within the home. Family life was the foundation upon which the polis, the city-state, rested. The values, traditions, and daily rhythms of households shaped not only individuals, but the larger community as well. To understand the Greeks, one must step inside their homes, sit at their hearths, and witness the balance of duty, love, and expectation that defined family life. The Greek household, or oikos, was more than just a physical dwelling. It was a unit of society that included not only the nuclear family, but also slaves, servants, and sometimes extended relatives. The head of the household, typically the father or husband, was responsible for its well-being. He managed finances, represented the family in civic matters, and made important decisions. Yet the oikos was not merely a male-dominated structure. Women, children, and even slaves had distinct roles that wove together into a complex and interdependent whole. Marriage was central to the Greek conception of family. For men, It was both a personal milestone and a civic duty. Marriages were often arranged by families, with alliances, dowries, and social standing playing crucial roles. Love, while not absent, was not the primary foundation. Instead, marriage was about continuity, the production of heirs, particularly male heirs, who could carry on the family name, inherit property, and serve the city. Despite these practical concerns, there is evidence that affection and companionship could grow within marriages, reflected in inscriptions and letters that occasionally reveal tender bonds. Women, within this structure, bore great responsibility, though often in ways confined to the domestic sphere. A wife managed the home, overseeing servants and slaves, preparing food, spinning and weaving, and ensuring the household ran smoothly. Her duties extended to religious observances as well, for many household rituals were the responsibility of women. Festivals and ceremonies honoring the gods often featured female participants, reflecting their spiritual role in maintaining harmony within the oikos. While women in Athens were restricted from political life, in other regions like Sparta, women enjoyed greater freedoms, including property ownership and influence. Children, meanwhile, were cherished, but also viewed through the lens of duty. Boys were raised with an eye toward future citizenship. From a young age, they learned values of loyalty, courage, and respect for tradition. Education varied by city-state, but in Athens, boys might study music, literature, philosophy, and physical training, preparing for a balanced life of mind and body. In Sparta, by contrast, boys entered the agoge, a rigorous state-sponsored system where they were trained to become soldiers from as young as 7 years old. Discipline, endurance, and obedience were instilled, creating warriors who lived for the polis above all else. Girls, though less formally educated, were prepared for their essential roles as wives and mothers. They learned domestic skills, religious practices, and, in certain regions, even physical training. In Sparta, for example, girls were encouraged to exercise so that they might grow strong and bear healthy children. In Athens, their lives were more secluded, but their influence within the home was undeniable. The upbringing of children, the management of daily resources, and the preservation of household traditions rested largely in female hands. The household was also deeply tied to religion. The hearth, sacred to Hestia, goddess of the home, was the spiritual center of the oikos. Families offered prayers and small sacrifices at the hearth, seeking protection and blessings. Births, marriages, and even deaths were marked by rituals performed within the home, ensuring that every stage of life was woven into a divine tapestry. In this way, religion and family life were inseparable, with the sacred present in the rhythms of everyday existence. Slaves were another essential part of many households, particularly in wealthier families. Their tasks varied from cooking and cleaning to child-rearing and assisting with business affairs. While their lives were bound by servitude, they too became part of the household structure, shaping the daily dynamics of the oikos. In some cases, slaves could be freed and integrated into society, though their path was never equal to that of freeborn citizens. Meals provided a glimpse into the intimacy of family life. Breakfasts might be simple, bread dipped in wine or honey, while dinners were heartier, shared among family members in the women's quarters of the house. When guests were invited, men often dined separately in the andron, a special room for entertaining. The act of sharing food was both a practical necessity and a symbolic ritual of unity. Around the table, stories were told, values were reinforced, and bonds were strengthened. Beyond the household, family identity carried into civic life. A man's lineage determined his rights as a citizen, while the family's reputation could influence political and social standing. Funerary customs further highlighted the importance of ancestry. Tombstones often emphasized the virtues of the deceased in relation to their family, reflecting pride in heritage and continuity. Even in death, the family remained central, binding the living and the dead in shared memory. Yet family life was not without its challenges. Infant mortality was high, and families often experienced loss. Economic hardship could strain households, and wars frequently tore them apart. Men leaving for campaigns meant women had to manage homes in their absence, while children grew up with uncertainty about their father's return. These realities remind us that beneath the ideals of duty and tradition, families face the same joys and sorrows that connect all human experience. In sum, family life in ancient Greece was both practical and profound. It was a world of defined roles and expectations, yet within those boundaries, warmth, devotion, and resilience flourished. The oikos was the stage on which Greek values of loyalty, honor, and tradition were first rehearsed, before they played out on the larger stage of the polis. By peering into these households, we discover not only the structure of ancient society, but also the tender, everyday humanity that sustained it. Section 6. Education and Learning in Ancient Greece. If family life formed the roots of Greek society, then education was the sunlight that helped it grow. For the Greeks, knowledge was not merely a tool for survival, it was a pathway to virtue, excellence, and understanding the world's mysteries. The way children were educated in ancient Greece tells us much about what the people valued most: wisdom, strength, discipline, and harmony between body and mind. Yet, education was not uniform. Each city-state shaped its own systems, creating very different experiences for the young, depending on where they lived. In Athens, perhaps the most famous center of learning in the ancient world, education was built upon the idea of creating balanced citizens, men who could think deeply, speak persuasively, and act responsibly within the democracy. Boys typically began their schooling around the age of 7, often guided by a pedagogue, a trusted household slave who escorted them to lessons and ensured their proper behavior. The Athenian curriculum was broad. It combined reading, writing, arithmetic, music, poetry, and physical education. Reading and writing were taught using wax tablets and styluses, with boys copying out letters and memorizing lines of poetry. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey were central texts, not only as literature, but as moral guides. These epic tales offered models of bravery, loyalty, and heroism. Music and poetry were equally important, for the Greeks believed that rhythm and harmony nurtured the soul just as exercise strengthened the body. Lyres and flutes filled classrooms, and boys were taught to recite and sing, learning both artistry and discipline. Physical education took place in the gymnasium, a word that comes from the Greek gymnos, meaning naked, for exercises were often performed unclothed. Here, boys trained in running, wrestling, discus throwing, and other athletic pursuits. The aim was not simply fitness, but the cultivation of arete, excellence in all aspects of life. A sound mind in a sound body was the guiding principle, and young Athenians strove to embody this harmony. As boys grew older, their education might advance into the realm of philosophy and rhetoric. Athens was home to some of the greatest thinkers in history: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, whose teachings influenced not only their students, but the entire course of Western thought. To be educated in philosophy was to ask profound questions. What is justice? What is the good life? How should one live? These were not abstract exercises, but vital concerns for citizens who would one day participate in civic debate and governance. Girls in Athens, however, received a very different education. Their learning was primarily domestic, taught at home by mothers and other female relatives. Skills such as weaving, cooking, and household management were emphasized, for women's roles were largely confined to the private sphere. While some exceptions existed, wealthy families might ensure that daughters learned to read and write. The general pattern was one of limited formal education for women. Yet, even within these restrictions, the knowledge women passed down about religion, tradition, and household rituals was deeply influential, shaping the character of the family and, by extension, the city itself. In Sparta, the story of education was strikingly different. Spartan boys were raised in the agoge, a state-controlled system that began at the age of 7 and continued into adulthood. Unlike in Athens, where the goal was balance, the Spartan aim was singular: to produce warriors capable of defending the state. Life in the agoge was harsh. Boys were removed from their families, grouped into units, and subjected to strict discipline. They were taught endurance, obedience, and courage. Food was deliberately scarce, encouraging resourcefulness. Physical training was relentless, encompassing running, wrestling, and combat skills. Yet, Spartan education was not purely physical. Boys learned music and poetry as well, but always with a martial flavor. Songs of bravery, loyalty, and sacrifice for the polis. Reading and writing were taught only to the extent necessary, for intellectual pursuits were considered secondary to military readiness. The result was a society where collective strength mattered more than individual expression, and the entire state was organized around the readiness of its warriors. Spartan girls, unlike their Athenian counterparts, also received formal training. They too exercised, ran, and practiced sports, for the belief was that strong women would bear strong children. This gave Spartan women a measure of independence rare in the Greek world. They could own property, manage estates, and command respect, their role in producing and sustaining warriors acknowledged as vital. Beyond Athens and Sparta, other Greek city-states blended elements of both approaches. Some emphasized practical skills like farming or trade, while others encouraged broader learning. What united them all, however, was a deep respect for the power of knowledge. Education was seen as the key to cultivating virtue and fulfilling one's role within the community. Outside formal schooling, learning also took place through daily life. Boys accompanied their fathers to markets, assemblies, and festivals, observing how adults behaved and spoke. Oral traditions, stories, myths, and songs were powerful teachers, instilling cultural memory and moral lessons. Even simple games could be educational. Dice, knucklebones, and board games sharpened strategy and focus, while outdoor play built resilience and camaraderie. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of Greek education lies in its philosophical traditions. The Academy of Plato and the Lyceum of Aristotle became models for future institutions, where the pursuit of truth and understanding was valued above all else. These schools asked not only how to live, but why, encouraging critical thought that transcended the boundaries of time and place. Their influence stretched across centuries, shaping the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and even modern education. In reflecting on Greek education, one sees a tension between freedom and discipline, individuality and collective responsibility. Athens nurtured the thinker, the artist, and the orator, while Sparta forged the soldier and servant of the state. Both paths revealed different answers to the same question: how should one prepare the young to serve their community? The legacy of these systems reminds us that education is never neutral. It reflects the values of a society, its hopes for the future, and its understanding of what it means to live well. For the Greeks, learning was more than memorization or training. It was a lifelong journey, a quest for balance, excellence, and wisdom. And it is this timeless pursuit that still speaks to us today, inviting us to consider what kind of education best nurtures both the individual and the world they inhabit. Section 7. Religion and Myth in Daily Life. In ancient Greece, religion was not confined to temples or sacred festivals. It was woven into the very fabric of daily existence. To live as a Greek was to live with the gods, for their presence was felt in every aspect of the world, whether in the rising of the sun, the rippling of the sea, or the sudden turn of fortune. Myths were not merely stories, they were guiding frameworks that explained the mysteries of life, offered moral lessons, and bound communities together. Each city-state worshipped the pantheon of Olympian gods, but devotion was not uniform. Athens, for instance, was especially devoted to Athena, goddess of wisdom and warcraft, while Sparta emphasized Apollo, symbol of discipline, harmony, and order. Local deities and heroes also played an important role, each polis weaving together a tapestry of beliefs that reflected its character and priorities. Religion was intensely communal. Sacrifices, rituals, and festivals united people in shared expressions of reverence. At the heart of this religious life stood the great Olympians. Zeus, king of the gods, embodied authority and justice. Poseidon, with his trident, ruled the seas and could bring both bounty and disaster to sailors. Demeter governed the fertility of the earth, her myths tied to the cycles of planting and harvest. Aphrodite represented love and desire, while Ares represented the violent and unpredictable nature of war. For the Greeks, these gods were not abstract forces, but vivid personalities, with strengths and flaws alike. They quarreled, loved, and deceived, just as humans did. This made them relatable and gave moral resonance to their stories. Daily rituals were simple yet profound. Before eating, families poured out small libations of wine to the gods. Offerings of bread, fruit, or small cakes might be placed on household altars. Farmers prayed for fertile fields, sailors for calm seas, and women for healthy children. These acts were not grand gestures, but intimate acknowledgments of divine presence in the everyday. To neglect such rituals was considered risky, for the gods were thought to be sensitive to honor and insult alike. Festivals, however, brought religion to life in grand communal fashion. The Panathenaic festival in Athens honored Athena with processions, sacrifices, and competitions in music, poetry, and athletics. The Olympic Games, held every 4 years at Olympia in honor of Zeus, drew athletes from across the Greek world, transforming sport into an act of devotion. Such gatherings celebrated not only the gods, but also the unity of the Greek people, binding diverse city-states together in shared culture. Mythology, meanwhile, served as both sacred teaching and cultural entertainment. The stories of heroes like Heracles, Perseus, and Theseus were retold at feasts, in plays, and during rituals, reinforcing ideals of bravery, cunning, and perseverance. The myth of Persephone, abducted by Hades, explained the changing of the seasons and offered a framework for understanding life, death, and rebirth. Myths were more than tales, they were symbolic mirrors, reflecting the values and fears of the society that told them. Theatrical performances, particularly in Athens, also carried strong religious significance. Tragedies and comedies were staged during festivals honoring Dionysus, the god of wine and drama. Playwrights such as Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides used their works to explore moral dilemmas, human suffering, and the will of the gods. The theater became both a form of entertainment and a forum for civic and spiritual reflection, blending art with religious devotion. Oracles and divination also played a powerful role in Greek life. The Oracle of Apollo at Delphi was the most famous, where priestesses known as Pythias delivered cryptic messages believed to be inspired by the god himself. Leaders and ordinary citizens alike consulted Delphi before wars, political decisions, or personal undertakings. Though often ambiguous, the oracle's pronouncements carried immense weight, shaping the course of history. Bird signs, sacrifices, and dreams were also read for divine messages, showing the Greeks' desire to align their actions with the will of the gods. Yet Greek religion was not simply about worship, it was deeply ethical. Concepts such as hubris, excessive pride, and nemesis, retribution, underscored the belief that human beings must respect limits and honor both gods and fellow mortals. Myths like that of Icarus, who flew too close to the sun, warned against arrogance. The gods might forgive or bless, but they could also punish, teaching that balance and moderation were essential virtues. Religious practices extended into transitions of life. Births, marriages, and deaths all carried sacred rituals. Newborns were welcomed with offerings. Brides were bathed and adorned in ceremonies invoking divine protection, and the dead were honored with funeral rites ensuring safe passage to the afterlife. To deny these rituals was to deny a person their place within the cosmic order. Even within this deeply religious framework, the Greeks were not without curiosity and skepticism. Philosophers such as Xenophanes criticized the anthropomorphic depictions of gods, while thinkers like Plato and Aristotle sought more rational explanations for the universe. Yet even as philosophy advanced, traditional religion remained embedded in social and cultural life, shaping festivals, laws, and the rhythms of the year. Religion in ancient Greece was not rigid dogma, but a living tradition. It offered comfort in uncertainty, meaning in hardship, and a sense of connection between human life and the vast cosmos. To walk through a Greek city was to see temples rising to the sky, altars glowing with offerings, and myths echoing in conversations and performances. The sacred was everywhere, intertwined with the practical and the joyful. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about Greek religion was its ability to adapt, to welcome new gods, and reinterpret old myths without losing its vitality. It was not about strict belief, but about shared practice, a constant dialogue between people and the divine. And in that dialogue, the Greeks found both guidance and wonder, shaping a culture whose echoes still reach us across millennia. Section 8. Food, dining, and daily meals in ancient Greece. Food in ancient Greece was never just about nourishment. It was a reflection of culture, geography, religion, and community. While the Greeks did not have the abundance or variety of later societies, they elevated simple ingredients into a culinary tradition that was deeply tied to their values and way of life. To dine in ancient Greece was to share more than food. It was to share identity, stories, and bonds that tied families and communities together. The Mediterranean climate shaped much of the Greek diet. The landscape of rocky hillsides and limited fertile plains did not allow for massive harvests of grain like those in Egypt or Mesopotamia. Instead, the Greeks relied on what the land could reliably produce: olives, grapes, barley, and a variety of herbs. Olive oil was the cornerstone of their cuisine, used not only for cooking, but also as a base for perfumes, medicines, and religious offerings. Grapes, too, were central, giving rise to wine, which was consumed daily but almost always diluted with water, as drinking unmixed wine was considered barbaric. Barley, rather than wheat, formed the staple grain, ground into bread or porridge that sustained rich and poor alike. Vegetables and legumes were everyday fare. Lentils, chickpeas, beans, and peas provided protein, while onions, garlic, and leeks flavored meals. Cabbages, turnips, and radishes were common, often eaten raw or lightly cooked. Herbs such as oregano, thyme, and mint added depth to simple dishes, while honey served as the primary sweetener. Meat, on the other hand, was not a daily indulgence. It was expensive and usually reserved for special occasions, particularly religious sacrifices, after which the meat of the sacrificed animal would be shared among the community. For ordinary people, fish and seafood were far more common sources of protein. Sardines, anchovies, and octopus were staples, especially for coastal communities, reflecting Greece's close relationship with the sea. Meals in ancient Greece followed a rhythm that mirrored the day's labors. Breakfast, akrotisma, was modest, often consisting of barley bread dipped in wine or water, sometimes accompanied by figs or olives. Lunch, ariston, was also simple: bread with cheese, olives, or dried fish. The main meal of the day was dinner, doupnen, taken in the evening after work. This was the time for a more substantial spread, especially if the family had means. Yet even then, luxury was rare. Most households lived on humble but nourishing fare, emphasizing frugality and moderation, which the Greeks considered virtues. Dining, however, was not just private. It had an important social and cultural dimension. The symposium was a uniquely Greek institution, a gathering of men for drinking, conversation, entertainment, and intellectual exchange. Held after a meal, the symposium revolved around wine, which was poured in carefully measured amounts by a symposiarch, a master of ceremonies. Wine was mixed with water in large bowls called craters, then ladled into individual cups. Drinking games, music, poetry recitals, and philosophical debates filled the evening. The symposium was as much about ideas as it was about pleasure, shaping Greek thought and culture through shared dialogue. For women, who were generally excluded from symposia, communal meals took other forms. Festivals, religious gatherings, and family feasts gave women spaces to share food, conversation, and tradition. Children's meals were often simpler, but young boys sometimes attended banquets as observers, learning the rituals of adult dining that they would one day join. Food was also closely linked to religion. Offerings to the gods often involved staples such as bread, honey, wine, or portions of sacrificed animals. These offerings underscored the idea that food was a gift from the divine and that eating was a sacred act. Harvest festivals, like the Thesmophoria in honor of Demeter, celebrated fertility and the cycles of the earth, tying the rhythm of meals to the rhythm of the seasons. Regional variations added further richness to Greek food culture. Coastal regions had greater access to fish, while mountainous inland communities relied more heavily on sheep and goats, producing cheeses, milk, and wool. Islands like Crete and Rhodes developed unique traditions, blending local produce with imported spices. Trade, too, expanded the Greek palate, bringing in figs, almonds, sesame, and luxury goods such as pepper and cinnamon from the East. While such imports were rare for common folk, they added to the diversity of flavors enjoyed by wealthier households. The Greeks also had clear ideas about diet and health. Influenced by physicians such as Hippocrates, they believed that balance in food mirrored balance in life. Overindulgence was discouraged, while moderation was praised. Certain foods were considered hot or cold, dry or moist, and were recommended or avoided depending on one's health condition. Thus, food was not only sustenance but also medicine, intertwined with the philosophical idea of harmony. Even dessert carried cultural meaning. While the Greeks did not have elaborate sweets, they enjoyed simple but delightful endings to meals: fresh fruit, nuts, and small cakes sweetened with honey or sesame seeds. Wine often concluded the evening, ensuring a balance of flavors and a sense of completion. Food in ancient Greece was therefore far more than what was on the plate. It was an expression of geography, a bond of community, a bridge to the divine, and a reflection of philosophical ideals. To share a meal was to share in the essence of Greek identity. From the humble barley bread of a farmer to the refined symposium of an Athenian noble, dining shaped the rhythms of daily life and the values that defined the culture. The simplicity of the Greek diet might surprise us today, but within that simplicity lay resilience and wisdom. They transformed modest ingredients into a cuisine that has endured across centuries, influencing Mediterranean traditions we still recognize. And perhaps, in their emphasis on moderation, balance, and community, the Greeks left behind lessons that remain nourishing for the spirit as much as for the body. Section 9. Art and Entertainment in Greek Society. When we imagine ancient Greece, visions of marble temples and statues of gods often come to mind, but the Greeks' creative expression went far beyond religious monuments. Art and entertainment were essential threads woven into their daily lives, shaping their understanding of beauty, harmony, and the very purpose of human existence. In their theaters, music halls, and even simple pottery workshops, the Greeks expressed not only artistic talent, but also deep philosophical reflections on the human condition. Greek art was never purely decorative. It was a conversation with the world. Every statue, vase, and painting carried layers of meaning. Pottery, for example, served as one of the most common artistic mediums. Though these vessels were often used for practical purposes, storing oil, wine, or grain, their surfaces became canvases for scenes from daily life, mythology, and athletics. Black figure and red figure pottery techniques allowed artists to create striking contrasts and fine details, depicting everything from Heracles wrestling lions to ordinary people preparing meals. In this way, a simple wine cup became both a household item and a storytelling device, capturing moments of Greek life for generations. Sculpture, meanwhile, reflected the Greek pursuit of ideal beauty and proportion. Early statues, such as the Kouros figures, were rigid and symmetrical, inspired by Egyptian models. But over time, Greek sculptors broke free from stiffness, striving instead to capture movement, emotion, and the complexity of the human form. By the classical period, artists like Phidias and Polykleitos were creating masterpieces that seemed almost alive. Polykleitos, for example, developed a system of proportions known as the canon, seeking perfect balance in the body. Sculptures such as the Doryphoros spear-bearer embodied this harmony, uniting mathematics, anatomy, and aesthetics. Through such works, the Greeks expressed their belief that beauty was not random, but rooted in universal order. Yet art was not confined to still images. Music and performance were equally vital forms of expression. The Greeks believed music had divine origins. Hermes was said to have invented the lyre, and Apollo himself was the god of music and poetry. Instruments like the lyre, kithara, and aulos, a reed instrument resembling a double flute, accompanied everything from religious ceremonies to drinking parties. Music was seen not just as entertainment, but as a force that could influence character, mood, and morality. Philosophers like Plato and Aristotle debated the ethical role of music, warning that certain modes might encourage unruly behavior, while others instilled discipline and harmony. Perhaps the most iconic form of Greek entertainment was theater. Born out of religious festivals in honor of Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy, theater evolved into one of Greece's most enduring cultural legacies. The great open-air theaters, like the one at Epidaurus, were marvels of acoustics and design, allowing thousands of spectators to hear a single actor's voice. Plays were not simply diversions, but explorations of fate, justice, love, and morality. Tragedians such as Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides brought mythological tales to life with emotional depth and moral complexity. In Oedipus Rex, Sophocles confronted audiences with questions of destiny and free will, while Euripides explored the darker aspects of human nature in plays like Medea. Comedy, too, flourished, with Aristophanes' biting satires poking fun at politics, philosophers, and daily life. To attend a play was to engage in a civic and spiritual exercise, where laughter and tears alike carried lessons about humanity. Art and entertainment also served as tools of collective identity. The Olympic Games, for instance, were not just athletic contests, but festivals of culture. Poets composed odes for victors, musicians performed, and sculptors immortalized athletes in bronze and marble. These events showcased not only physical excellence, but also the cultural achievements of the Greek world, reinforcing unity among city-states while still allowing for rivalry. What is striking about Greek entertainment is how seamlessly it blended the sacred with the secular. A performance at a Dionysian festival was simultaneously a religious offering and a communal gathering. Music at a symposium was both relaxation and a philosophical exploration. Even dance, often performed in choruses, had spiritual and social dimensions, uniting participants in rhythm and purpose. Moreover, art in Greece was never entirely separate from politics. Public buildings like the Parthenon were adorned with sculptures and friezes that reflected civic pride and collective identity. The theater itself was funded by wealthy citizens as a form of civic duty, ensuring that even the poorest could attend. In this way, artistic expression reinforced democracy, bringing citizens together to witness stories that questioned, critiqued, and celebrated their society. The legacy of Greek art and entertainment is profound. Their ideals of harmony and proportion influenced the Renaissance, and their dramas continue to be performed today, reminding us that the questions they raised remain timeless. The Greeks saw art not as luxury, but as necessity, a means of connecting with each other, the divine, and the eternal truths of life. In their music, sculpture, plays, and festivals, the Greeks revealed a culture that valued imagination as much as reason. They understood that to be fully human was not only to build and think, but also to create, to play, and to express. Their art and entertainment remind us that joy, beauty, and reflection are as essential to civilization as laws and armies. Section 10. Education and Learning in Ancient Greece. Education in ancient Greece was considered essential for cultivating not only skill, but also virtue, wisdom, and civic responsibility. To be educated was to participate fully in the life of the polis, the city-state, and to understand one's role within both society and the wider world. Learning was not uniform across all regions of Greece. For Athens and Sparta, for instance, emphasized very different values and approaches reflecting their distinctive social priorities. In Athens, boys began formal education around the age of 7. Their first lessons were usually in reading, writing, and arithmetic. They learned to read on wax tablets using a stylus and practiced writing on papyrus or parchment. Arithmetic was taught for practical purposes, such as managing household accounts, trade, or public contributions. These foundational skills were considered necessary for participating in civic life and were paired with lessons in music and physical education. Music, including learning the lyre and songs, was believed to cultivate the mind and the spirit, instilling harmony, discipline, and moral sensitivity. Physical education was equally important. Boys practiced running, wrestling, discus, javelin, and other sports in gymnasiums, which were centers of both physical training and social learning. Athletic skill was not merely for personal benefit, it reflected courage, discipline, and readiness for civic duty, particularly in times of military service. Physical fitness was regarded as essential for balance of body and mind, echoing the Greek ideal that health, wisdom, and virtue were inseparably linked. Beyond reading, writing, and physical training, higher education for the privileged in Athens included philosophy, rhetoric, and science. Students studied the works of great thinkers such as Homer, Hesiod, and eventually Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Rhetoric was taught so that young men could speak persuasively in public assemblies or legal courts, an essential skill in a democratic society. Philosophy encouraged critical thinking, debate, and reflection on the nature of life, ethics, and the cosmos. These lessons were not merely academic exercises, but preparation for active, thoughtful participation in civic and cultural life. In contrast, education in Sparta was far more oriented toward producing disciplined warriors. Spartan boys entered military training, or agoge, at the age of 7. Their education emphasized obedience, endurance, combat skills, and communal loyalty. Reading and writing were included, but played a minor role compared to physical training. Survival skills, and lessons in strategy and discipline. The Spartan ideal prioritized the collective over the individual, shaping children to serve the needs of the state above personal desire. Girls' education in ancient Greece varied widely depending on region and social class. In Athens, education for girls was largely domestic, focused on household management, weaving, and child-rearing. Some wealthy families might also provide instruction in reading or music. In Sparta, however, girls received more formal physical training, as strong and healthy women were believed essential for producing strong children and maintaining the fitness of the state. Physical activity included running, wrestling, and other exercises, with the goal of fostering both health and resilience. Mentorship and apprenticeship were also central to Greek learning. Beyond formal lessons, young Greeks learned from older citizens, poets, and craftsmen. Apprenticeship in crafts such as pottery, metalwork, or sculpture allowed young people to acquire practical skills, observe masters at work, and eventually contribute to the economy and culture of their city. Learning by doing was essential, for it combined manual skill with observation, patience, and creativity. Greek education was deeply tied to moral and ethical development. Lessons emphasized moderation, courage, and respect for laws and customs. Young learners were expected to understand their duties as citizens, neighbors, and family members. Through both intellectual and physical education, they were prepared to engage with their world thoughtfully, ethically, and effectively. Education was also connected to religion and ritual. Festivals, storytelling, and public ceremonies offered informal learning opportunities. Children observed sacrifices, listened to myths, and participated in communal celebrations, absorbing moral lessons and cultural narratives alongside spiritual teachings. Stories of heroes, gods, and moral exemplars shaped both imagination and behavior, teaching lessons that extended far beyond the classroom. For the Greeks, learning was not a rigid sequence, but a continuous process of growth. It combined the practical, the intellectual, and the moral. It was designed to cultivate balanced citizens, capable of contributing to society, appreciating beauty, and understanding the deeper questions of existence. Education shaped the rhythm of childhood and adolescence, linking knowledge with action, thought with responsibility, and the individual with the community. Even after formal schooling ended, learning remained lifelong. Adults continued to engage in discussion, study, and mentorship, reflecting the Greek belief that wisdom and virtue were pursued throughout life. Libraries, lectures, and philosophical dialogues provided opportunities to explore ideas deeply, reinforcing the connection between personal development and civic engagement. In this way, education in ancient Greece was not only preparation for work or civic duty, but a guiding framework for living a considered, balanced, and meaningful life. It reflected the values, aspirations, and vision of a civilization that prized wisdom, curiosity, and ethical action, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire our own approaches to learning and growth. Section 11. Greek clothing, fashion, and daily attire. Clothing in ancient Greece was remarkably simple, yet it reflected deep cultural values, social distinctions, and practical needs. Unlike later civilizations that relied on complex tailoring, the Greeks favored loose, flowing garments that could be draped and fastened with minimal sewing. These garments allowed freedom of movement, comfort in a Mediterranean climate, and elegance through simplicity. Every piece of clothing, every fold of fabric, carried meaning about identity, status, and occasion. The most common garment for both men and women was the chiton, a rectangular piece of cloth made of wool or linen. Men's chitons were generally shorter, falling to the knees or mid-calf, while women wore longer versions that reached the ankles. The cloth was folded around the body and pinned at the shoulders with brooches, called fibulae, and sometimes belted at the waist. This allowed individuals to adjust the draping according to activity, comfort, and style. The simplicity of the chiton belied the skill required to drape it elegantly, creating flowing lines and balanced folds that reflected both modesty and grace. Another common garment was the himation, a heavier rectangular cloak worn over the chiton, particularly by men and older women. The himation was draped over the shoulder or around the body, serving as both a fashion statement and a functional garment for warmth or modesty. Philosophers and orators often favored the himation, draping it with care to signal dignity, intellect, and social refinement. Citizens attending the assembly, public ceremonies, or religious festivals would wear the himation to convey respectability and decorum. Women also wore the peplos, a longer, sleeveless garment that was folded down at the top, creating a layered effect over the chest. It was pinned at the shoulders and sometimes belted, creating an elegant silhouette that emphasized vertical lines. The peplos, like the chiton, allowed for both freedom of movement and the ability to express individuality through color, pattern, and arrangement. Wealthier women often used finely woven linen or imported fabrics, while those of modest means relied on coarser wool or homemade cloth. Footwear was generally simple. Sandals were most common, made of leather straps or soles. Wealthier citizens sometimes wore more elaborate designs, while children often went barefoot for comfort and mobility. In colder regions or during winter, boots or wrapped cloths were used for warmth. The Greeks also considered barefoot walking appropriate in certain sacred or private spaces, highlighting their belief in connection to the earth and the natural world. Color and decoration conveyed social status and personal taste. While natural hues such as white, beige, and brown were common for daily wear, brighter colors were reserved for special occasions or the affluent. Red, purple, and blue were considered luxurious and were sometimes used to indicate rank or participation in specific rituals. Patterns were subtle, often geometric or symbolic, woven into the fabric rather than embroidered. The skill of a family in weaving and decorating cloth was a source of pride, particularly for women responsible for producing garments at home. Jewelry and accessories enhanced clothing without overwhelming it. Both men and women wore rings, necklaces, bracelets, and earrings, often crafted from gold, silver, or bronze. Brooches, clasps, and pins were functional, but could also be decorative, featuring intricate designs that reflected mythology, nature, or abstract patterns. Hair was styled with care, adorned with ribbons, fillets, or wreaths of flowers. Olive branches or laurel leaves. These elements added elegance and personal expression to the otherwise simple lines of Greek garments. Hairstyles themselves were diverse. Men typically kept short hair and trimmed beards, though certain philosophers or religious devotees wore longer hair as a symbol of wisdom or piety. Women braided their hair, twisted it into buns, or coiled it with decorative pins. Wealthy women might employ servants to style and maintain elaborate hairdos, while simpler styles were preferred by commoners for practicality. Hair care and grooming were closely linked to notions of beauty, health, and social propriety, reflecting the broader Greek value of harmony between body and mind. Seasonal adaptations were also common. Lightweight linen was favored in the hot summer months, allowing ventilation and comfort, while wool provided warmth in winter. Cloaks and wraps added layers for protection against wind and rain. Citizens adapted their attire to climate, terrain, and activity, demonstrating a practical understanding of the environment alongside aesthetic sensibility. Greek fashion was intimately tied to function and symbolism. Clothing marked the difference between men and women, children and adults, citizens and non-citizens. Specific garments were required for religious ceremonies, theatrical performances, and public appearances. Soldiers wore tunics and cloaks suited for battle, while athletes trained and competed wearing minimal garments to maximize mobility. Even in private life, the Greeks valued cleanliness, proportion, and elegance, ensuring that clothing contributed to both personal comfort and social harmony. Ultimately, Greek clothing reflected a culture that prized simplicity, balance, and practicality, while still allowing space for individuality, beauty, and social signaling. Through the careful draping of a chiton, the selection of a himation, or the adornment of hair and jewelry, individuals expressed identity, status, and taste. The elegance of Greek attire lay not in complexity, but in the artful arrangement of lines, folds, and accessories, a quiet sophistication that mirrored their ideals in art, philosophy, and daily life. In this way, clothing in ancient Greece was more than protection or fashion. It was a subtle reflection of society, a canvas of cultural expression, and a daily ritual of self-presentation that connected the wearer to family, community, and the divine. Section 12. Homes, Architecture, and Living Spaces in Ancient Greece. The homes of ancient Greece reveal a fascinating blend of practicality, aesthetics, and social organization. Unlike the grand palaces of myth, most Greeks lived in modest dwellings designed for comfort, family life, and daily activity. These houses were carefully constructed to balance light, air, and privacy, reflecting the Greek appreciation for proportion, harmony, and connection to the surrounding environment. Every element of a Greek home, from the layout to the materials, carried meaning about lifestyle, social status, and cultural values. Most homes were made of mud bricks or stone, with wooden beams supporting the roof. Roofs were often covered with terracotta tiles that protected inhabitants from rain and heat. Floors were simple, sometimes compacted earth or stone slabs, and in wealthier homes, mosaics or plaster provided decoration. Houses were usually 1 or 2 stories, with the upper story often reserved for sleeping, and the lower for cooking, storage, and socializing. Courtyards served as the heart of the home, offering open space for daily tasks, relaxation, and family gatherings. The courtyard, or atrium, was central to Greek domestic life. Open to the sky, it allowed sunlight and ventilation to reach interior rooms. Water features, plants, or small shrines were sometimes included, creating a peaceful and contemplative space. Courtyards provided room for cooking, washing, and social interactions. Women often worked here, spinning, weaving, or preparing meals, while children played nearby. Even in bustling cities, the courtyard offered a quiet, private oasis in the midst of urban activity. Inside, rooms were functional yet comfortable. The main room, or andron, was often reserved for men and guests, a space for entertaining, discussion, and dining. Furniture was simple: low couches called klini, tables, stools, and storage chests. These rooms were designed to accommodate both daily life and formal gatherings, blending practicality with aesthetic order. Walls might be painted with murals or adorned with simple decorations, often reflecting mythological scenes or natural motifs. Lighting came from lamps fueled by olive oil, creating a warm, gentle glow in the evenings. Bedrooms were usually small and sparsely furnished, emphasizing rest and privacy. Beds were simple frames with woven reeds or soft mattresses filled with straw. Blankets or linens were used for warmth, and personal belongings were often stored in chests. Privacy was highly valued, and rooms were arranged to separate family life from public or guest spaces. Sleeping areas were cozy and intimate, fostering comfort while preserving social norms of order and decorum. Kitchens were practical and often small, equipped with clay stoves, storage jars, and tools for cooking and baking. Olive oil, grains, vegetables, and fish were staples, and kitchens were designed for efficiency rather than decoration. Fireplaces and hearths were the center of warmth and sustenance, while cooking methods reflected both local traditions and seasonal availability. The smells of baking bread, roasting fish, and boiling vegetables filled the home, creating a sensory rhythm to daily life. Storage was also an important feature. Large clay jars, or pithoi, held grains, wine, olive oil, and other essentials. These jars were often stored in cool, shaded areas of the house or in cellars. Proper storage was vital, as preservation of food and materials ensured both survival and comfort. Wealthier families might have more elaborate storage solutions, including decorated jars or built-in niches in walls. Reflecting social status and taste, Greek homes were not isolated, they were carefully integrated into neighborhoods. Streets were narrow, and houses often shared walls or courtyards with neighbors. This closeness fostered community and interaction, though privacy within the home was carefully maintained. Public life and domestic life were distinct but intertwined, allowing Greeks to navigate social relationships while enjoying personal and family spaces. Architecture extended beyond individual homes. Temples, marketplaces, and public buildings followed the same principles of proportion, balance, and harmony. Columns, friezes, and pediments reflected aesthetic ideals that were mirrored in private dwellings. Even small decorative details in homes, such as painted patterns or carved wooden panels, echoed the artistic values of the broader society. The design of Greek homes was practical, aesthetic, and deeply connected to daily rhythms. Sunlight, ventilation, water, and spatial organization all contributed to a living environment that promoted comfort, health, and social cohesion. Life in these homes was structured yet flexible, allowing for work, play, rest, and social interaction. In many ways, the Greek home was a reflection of Greek life itself, balanced, harmonious, and attuned to both human needs and the beauty of the surrounding world. Through careful design, functional elegance, and subtle decoration, these dwellings offered not only shelter, but also a space for thought, creativity, and connection. Every detail, from the layout of the courtyard to the placement of jars and beds, revealed values of order, comfort, and aesthetic refinement. Greek homes remind us that even simple structures can embody cultural ideals, blending utility with beauty, and providing a serene space for daily living, family life, and quiet reflection. Section 13. Daily food, cooking, and meals in ancient Greece. Food in ancient Greece was simple, seasonal, and deeply connected to the land, the sea, and social customs. Most people relied on grains, vegetables, fruits, olives, and occasionally fish or meat. Meals were designed to be nourishing and communal, reflecting the importance of family, friendship, and hospitality. Eating was not merely about sustenance. It was a daily ritual that strengthened social bonds and reflected cultural values. The staple of the Greek diet was bread, often made from barley or wheat. Bread was baked in home ovens or communal bakeries, and it could be eaten plain, dipped in olive oil, or paired with vegetables and cheeses. Porridge, made from grains, was another common food, sometimes sweetened with honey or flavored with herbs. These simple foods provided energy and comfort, sustaining both laborers and thinkers alike. Olives and olive oil were central to Greek cuisine. Olives were eaten whole, pressed for oil, or used in cooking to flavor dishes. Olive oil served multiple purposes: for cooking, dressing salads, and even as a condiment for bread. It was prized not only for taste, but also for its health benefits, symbolizing vitality and the richness of the land. Olives and oil also had cultural and religious significance, appearing in rituals, offerings, and daily life alike. Vegetables were abundant and widely consumed. Onions, garlic, lentils, beans, cabbage, and cucumbers were common, providing both flavor and nutrition. These foods were prepared simply, boiled, roasted, or incorporated into stews. Herbs such as oregano, mint, and thyme enhanced taste and were sometimes used for medicinal purposes. Fruits like figs, grapes, apples, and pomegranates were enjoyed fresh or dried, and they added sweetness to meals throughout the year. Cheese and dairy products were another staple, particularly in rural areas. Sheep and goat milk were most common, and cheeses ranged from soft and fresh to firmer, aged varieties. Cheese was used in cooking, as a snack, or included in pies and pastries. It provided protein and richness to meals that might otherwise be simple or monotonous, offering variety in flavor and texture. Meat was less commonly eaten, often reserved for special occasions, religious sacrifices, or wealthy households. Chicken, pork, lamb, and goat were the most common meats, while wild game could also appear. Fish and seafood were more widely consumed, especially in coastal regions. Fish could be grilled, dried, or preserved with salt, and it often provided an affordable and accessible source of protein. Meals were typically eaten in small groups or as family gatherings. The Greeks valued the symposium, a formal drinking and discussion event for men, where wine was diluted with water and accompanied by small dishes, bread, fruit, and cheese. These gatherings encouraged conversation, debate, and reflection, blending nourishment with intellectual engagement. Wine itself was central to Greek culture, considered a gift from the gods, and consumed in moderation as a complement to food and company. Cooking methods were simple yet effective. Boiling, roasting, and baking were the primary techniques. Clay pots, grills, and ovens were commonly used, and the use of fire required careful attention. Meals were prepared with fresh, seasonal ingredients, emphasizing natural flavors and textures. Spices and condiments were minimal compared to modern cuisine, allowing the taste of the main ingredients to shine through. Breakfast was often light, consisting of bread with olives or cheese, or porridge sweetened with honey. Lunch, for workers and children, might include bread, fruits, and vegetables. Dinner was the main meal, often enjoyed in the late afternoon or evening. Families gathered around low tables, reclining on cushions or couches for those who could afford them, sharing food and conversation. Even modest households valued the communal aspect of meals, seeing them as moments of togetherness and rest. Food also had religious and cultural significance. Many dishes were prepared for offerings to gods or during festivals. Certain ingredients, such as honey, wine, and grains, were considered sacred. Meals and feasts could mark life events, including births, marriages, and funerals, connecting sustenance with ritual and tradition. In this way, food was both nourishment and a bridge between daily life and spiritual practice. Snacks and street foods existed as well, particularly in urban centers like Athens. Vendors sold bread, olives, and simple pastries, offering quick sustenance to workers and travelers. These foods were convenient, affordable, and familiar, providing a daily rhythm to city life. Children often enjoyed small treats, while adults used street foods to supplement meals or during brief breaks in the day. Ultimately, Greek food was defined by its simplicity, quality, and connection to nature. It reflected the seasons, the landscape, and the cultural emphasis on balance, moderation, and enjoyment. Meals were sensory experiences. The taste of fresh bread, the aroma of roasting vegetables, the texture of ripe fruit, all creating a rhythm of life that was both nourishing and reflective. Through daily eating habits, the Greeks cultivated both body and mind. Shared meals reinforced family ties, social structures, and civic participation. Cooking and eating were intertwined with thought, conversation, and community, making even the simplest dishes an essential part of Greek life. In this way, the daily foods and cooking practices of ancient Greece reveal a society attentive to balance, pleasure, and practicality, where every meal was an opportunity for health, connection, and reflection, blending sustenance with culture and care. Section 14. Greek religion, gods, and daily spiritual life. Religion was a central part of daily life in ancient Greece. The Greeks believed that gods and goddesses influenced nearly every aspect of existence, from the growth of crops to success in battle, from health to personal fortune. Temples, shrines, statues, and altars were scattered throughout cities and towns, reflecting a society deeply attentive to spiritual matters. Even in modest homes, small household shrines, called Lararia, honored protective spirits or family deities, ensuring divine presence in daily routines. Each city often had a patron deity who was especially revered. Athens honored Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategy, while Corinth looked to Poseidon, god of the sea. Temples and festivals dedicated to these gods became focal points of civic pride, religious devotion, and communal identity. Citizens participated actively in festivals, processions, and rituals, blending devotion with celebration, reflection, and shared joy. Daily life included small acts of worship, even for those who could not attend public ceremonies. People made offerings of food, wine, or incense to household gods. Prayer was a quiet, personal act, asking for guidance, protection, or good fortune. Many Greeks carried small charms or amulets believed to protect against misfortune, illustrating the intimate connection between faith and everyday life. Sacred festivals were among the most vibrant aspects of Greek religious practice. Festivals often combined ritual sacrifices, athletic competitions, dramatic performances, and feasts. The Panathenea in Athens honored Athena and included races, music contests, and processions, providing a sense of community and civic unity. Religious observances were not separate from daily life. They punctuated it, bringing rhythm, purpose, and a sense of belonging. Sacrifices were central to worship. Animals such as goats, sheep, or bulls were offered in temples or at altars, often accompanied by prayers and hymns. Portions of the sacrifice were burned for the gods, while the rest was shared among participants as a communal meal. These acts reinforced social bonds, created shared experiences, and reminded citizens of their connection to both the divine and one another. Oracles and divination were also significant. Many Greeks consulted oracles, such as the famous Oracle of Delphi, seeking guidance for personal decisions, political matters, or military campaigns. Priests, priestesses, or seers interpreted signs, dreams, or omens. Consulting the divine was considered prudent and wise, providing reassurance, counsel, and a sense of order in an unpredictable world. Greek mythology permeated both ritual and daily life. Stories of gods, heroes, and mythical creatures were not only entertaining, they conveyed moral lessons, cultural ideals, and warnings. Parents, teachers, and storytellers passed these tales to children, linking mythology with education, ethics, and imagination. Festivals, theater, and visual art drew heavily on these narratives, keeping myths alive in public consciousness. Temples and sanctuaries were architectural marvels, designed to honor gods and create awe-inspiring spaces. Columns, friezes, statues, and altars reflected balance, proportion, and beauty, mirroring the broader Greek appreciation for harmony in life. Visiting a temple was both a religious and aesthetic experience. Citizens could admire artistry, participate in rituals, and reflect on spiritual teachings all at once. Daily spiritual life also included personal practices, such as washing before entering sacred spaces, making small offerings, or reciting prayers. Even mundane tasks, like planting crops or preparing food, could be accompanied by words of thanks or petitions for divine favor. These small acts reinforced a continuous awareness of the God's presence and influence. Mystery religions and cults added further dimensions. These secretive practices offered participants a closer, more personal connection to specific deities. Initiations, rites, and esoteric teachings promised protection, enlightenment, or blessings, complementing public worship. While less visible to outsiders, these traditions enriched the spiritual landscape, illustrating diversity in beliefs and devotion. Greek religion was never distant or abstract. It was intertwined with all aspects of life, from the timing of daily meals to the planning of civic events. From agricultural labor to leisure, the presence of gods shaped choices, behaviors, and values. Life itself was a collaboration with the divine, a rhythm of action, reflection, and reverence. The spiritual practices of the Greeks cultivated mindfulness, gratitude, and respect for natural and social order. Observing rituals, honoring deities, and participating in festivals offered meaning, structure, and a sense of continuity across generations. Religious life was calm, purposeful, and quietly profound, providing a framework for personal and communal well-being. Through temples, prayers, sacrifices, stories, and festivals, the ancient Greeks expressed their understanding of existence, morality, and beauty. Religion was not merely doctrine, but a lived experience, a gentle yet pervasive presence in everyday activities. The careful balance of devotion, ritual, and daily attention to the divine made Greek spiritual life a rich and calming tapestry, guiding citizens through life with quiet reverence and mindful participation. Section 15. Education, Games, and Leisure in Ancient Greece. Education in ancient Greece was considered essential, though it varied depending on social class, gender, and city-state. Boys in wealthier families received formal instruction in reading, writing, mathematics, music, poetry, and philosophy. Tutors or schools taught using simple tools, wax tablets, ink, and papyrus scrolls, focusing on memorization, recitation, and understanding of cultural and civic values. Learning was slow and methodical, a quiet, structured activity designed to cultivate the mind and character. Physical training was equally important. Boys attended the gymnasium, a large open space with covered areas for exercise, wrestling, running, and discus throwing. Strength, agility, and endurance were considered virtues, preparing young men for both military service and civic participation. Daily routines included calm stretches, steady jogging, and disciplined practice of combat techniques, fostering both bodily health and mental focus. Girls' education was usually domestic, focusing on managing households, weaving, cooking, and social etiquette. While formal instruction was less common, many girls learned poetry, music, and basic literacy from mothers or tutors. This knowledge enabled them to contribute to family life, participate in religious rituals, and maintain social connections. Their education emphasized patience, skill, and the calm mastery of daily responsibilities. Games and leisure activities were integral to Greek life. Children played with dolls, miniature weapons, hoops, and balls, developing coordination, imagination, and social skills. Board games, such as Patea, encouraged strategic thinking and concentration. Play was not only entertainment, but a gentle training for future responsibilities. Combining focus with creativity in a calm and enjoyable manner, public festivals offered another form of leisure. Citizens gathered to watch theatrical performances, musical contests, and athletic competitions. The Olympic Games, held every 4 years, were a major event celebrating strength, skill, and unity among city-states. Spectators observed in quiet admiration or shared gentle cheers, experiencing a sense of community and cultural pride. Festivals provided structure and rhythm to the year, blending observation, reflection, and shared enjoyment. Music and poetry were present in both public and private life. Lyres, flutes, and percussion instruments accompanied recitations, dances, and feasts. Melodies and rhythms created calm atmospheres for reflection, storytelling, and social connection. Poetry, especially epic and lyric forms, conveyed moral lessons, historical tales, and emotional expression, enriching daily life with thoughtfulness and beauty. Dining and social gatherings also contributed to leisure. Symposia allowed men to recline on couches, enjoy light refreshments, and engage in calm, reflective conversation. Guests discussed philosophy, politics, art, or simple everyday matters. Even modest households enjoyed family meals as quiet moments of connection, reinforcing bonds and creating gentle rhythms in daily routines. Citizens also appreciated the natural world. Walking through olive groves, along rivers, or near the sea offered calm reflection, exercise, and inspiration. Gardens provided fragrant herbs, fruits, and flowers, giving both nourishment and sensory pleasure. Observation of nature taught patience, attentiveness, and appreciation for beauty, fostering a gentle harmony with the world. Hobbies included crafts, pottery, painting, and sculpture, Individuals practiced these arts slowly, with care and precision. Creating functional or decorative objects demanded attention, skill, and imagination, encouraging a calm focus that was satisfying and rewarding. Artistic expression complemented both work and leisure, allowing quiet contemplation and personal achievement. Education, games, and leisure in ancient Greece were deeply intertwined with moral and social development. Learning was balanced with physical exercise, artistic practice, and gentle entertainment. These activities cultivated patience, self-discipline, appreciation for beauty, and communal harmony. The rhythms of study, play, and reflection created a measured, mindful life, fostering both intellectual and emotional well-being. Even the smallest daily acts, reading aloud, tossing a ball, practicing the lyre, or walking in a garden, carried significance. Each moment of learning or leisure was an opportunity for growth, connection, and quiet joy. The Greeks valued these experiences as essential components of a fulfilling life, balancing work, thought, and play with calm intentionality. Through careful education, playful games, artistic creation, and engagement with the natural and social environment, Greek citizens developed a rich inner life, physical vitality, and social awareness. Leisure and learning were intertwined, blending focus, reflection, and gentle enjoyment, leaving a legacy of thoughtful, harmonious daily living. Outro. As we slowly come to the end of this journey through ancient Greece, imagine yourself walking quietly through sunlit streets, past temples and gardens, and into a peaceful home. Let your mind rest on the gentle rhythms of daily life. Meals shared with family, soft music from a lyre, children playing in the courtyard, and thoughtful conversation among friends. Allow the calm patterns of ancient Greek life to linger in your mind. Breathe slowly, feel your body relax, and remember that life, even thousands of years ago, found moments of quiet, reflection, and simple joy. This narration is now coming to a close. Let your thoughts settle, your muscles release tension, and your mind drift toward restful calm. Good sleep, gentle dreams, and a serene night are waiting for you. Carrying the wisdom and harmony of a world long past, yet quietly alive in your imagination.